Looking back at all the platformers I've played, it's amazing to see how different they all are. Whether they're 2D or 3D, linear or open, brutally challenging or pathetically easy, they all have something unique to offer. But there's one thing that I have noticed. The world of platformers is an absolute sausage fest. Look at it. Mario, Sonic, Donkey Kong, Crash, Spyro, Rayman, and so many more. All dudes. Look at them, hogging the spotlight with their dicks. I don't know about you, but I'm craving something different. There's nothing wrong with male characters, I'm a male character myself, but not everything needs to be about us. Even when there are important female lead characters, they're often secondary to some bloke. There's only so many times I can pretend to be interested in a male creature with googly eyes as the main character. There are so many of them. I need a character to topple this platforming patriarchy and bring some much needed diversity to this lineup of video game heroes. And I don't think there's any better candidate than the half-genie hero herself, Shantae. Before we go any further, I just want to clarify that I'm not going to make this a long-winded commentary about gender representation in games. I just needed a way to introduce the video, and I couldn't think of any better ideas. I did spend some time looking for some better ideas, but it turns out I left them in my other jacket. Also, I wanted an excuse to say dicks, because that's funny. So yeah. Anyway, let's crack on and talk about Shantae. For the uninitiated, Shantae is an indie series of top-notch platformers, and I count myself as a big fan of them. The series has gained popularity more recently, and people have come to respect, appreciate, and celebrate it, but back in the early days, especially with its first entry, it flew under the radar. And that's where we're going to start, with Shantae's humble beginnings on the Game Boy Color. For many successful series, the first entry tends to be the roughest. They're good games, but they often have some sort of major issue that stops them from being great games. They just haven't found their feet yet. So it'll be interesting to look back on the first Shantae game and see how it fares. To start with, this game has one of the strongest openings I've seen in any platformer. There's so much to enjoy about it. Right off the bat, the music and visual style really stand out, and it looks and sounds gorgeous, especially by Game Boy Color standards. The visuals are vibrant and surprisingly detailed, the music is catchy and upbeat, and both are consistently amazing throughout the whole game. It's especially apparent in this opening. The visuals and music combine with the atmosphere to make it extremely memorable and fun. The feeling of the location being under attack adds so much. It's high energy, story relevant, and non-stop action. It's brilliant. So brilliant that it even became a recurring opening across the series. I just love it. Who would have thought that arson and terrorism could be so entertaining? It also eases you into what the game is all about. Shantae is a 2D platformer where you control the eponymous half-genie Shantae, who is the guardian genie of Scuttletown. One day, Scuttletown is attacked by the infamous lady pirate Risky Boots and her crew of Tinkerbats, who steal the steam engine from Shantae's uncle Mimic. Risky's plan is to upgrade this steam engine using 4 elemental relics, use it to power her giant Tinker Tank, conquer all of Sequinland, and rule it with a literal iron fist. Shantae's mission is to collect the 4 relics first, and stop Risky from achieving her goals. It's a simple story, nothing too elaborate or exciting, but it's enough to catch your interest. Risky Boots is also a great antagonist, threatening, cartoonishly evil, your classic platformer villain. What this game does that not many of these early platformers do is tell more of the story beyond the beginning and ending. Shantae actually involves secondary characters, including but not limited to Mimic, Bolo, Sky, and Roddy Tops, to actually move the story along and help build the world of the game. It's such a minor thing, but a little development goes a long way. It adds so much character and gets you invested in what's going on, more than the likes of something like Mario ever could. But that's not the only way this game builds its world. Where most platformers divide themselves up into separate, distinct levels, Shantae instead takes place in one giant interconnected world, complete with towns, labyrinths, and stretches of platforming goodness that tie them together. It's different, but it's really cool. As you're exploring and traversing the world, you actually feel like you're going somewhere. You're on a proper adventure, instead of just trying to reach the end of a series of levels that have no actual relation to the greater context of the world. To add to this, the world of Shantae has a day and night cycle, which not only changes the visuals and music, but also changes the characteristics of the enemies you encounter, and also what services are available to you in certain towns. Time passes here. Sequinland feels alive. And this is just a Game Boy Color game. What excuse do these console games have? It's very impressive getting to explore a world like this. I think it's the closest I've come to understanding the appeal of going outside. Despite all of this interconnected world and day-night cycle stuff sounding complicated, the formula of Shantae is actually pretty simple. After the opening sequence in Scuttletown, Shantae heads off to Watertown to locate the first relic. To get to Watertown, Shantae needs to traverse 2D environments filled with enemies, hazards, and other typical platforming obstacles. Once Shantae reaches Watertown, she needs to locate Bolo, who will help her access the first labyrinth. Upon completing the labyrinth, Shantae earns the Dribble Stone. This process is repeated 3 more times, each involving a different town, ally, and labyrinth, until the end of the game where Shantae confronts Risky Boots. I'll go into each component individually, but together this is a great formula. I said it before, but it really does feel like an adventure. Let's start by talking about the in-between, since that's where most of the gameplay happens. These in-between sections that link towns and labyrinths together are the sort of thing you'd expect from your standard platformer, moving from one side of the screen to the other, dealing with whatever obstacles the game throws at you. This is where you'll spend the majority of your time, since Shantae will need to traverse these areas to reach her destinations. Controlling Shantae is very simple. She's able to walk, run, crouch, attack using her hair, attack while crouching, and of course, jump. She can also use a variety of items, which I'll get to. Using these abilities, Shantae must make it through these hazardous areas to reach wherever it is she's trying to go. These areas are made even more dangerous at night time, as enemies are a lot stronger than usual. This is the foundation of Shantae's gameplay, and it's extremely solid. It's fun, it controls well apart from having to hold down the attack button to run, and it's actually pretty challenging. The game does not go easy on you, but it is fair most of the time. Occasionally the game does suddenly spring enemies onto you unexpectedly, but you have time to react, and the game does give you plenty of health items to survive anyway, so it's not total bullshit in the same way that Rayman is. I'm still not over that. Fuck you, Rayman. Anyway, the point is, Shantae is very fun to control, and I never had problems with her at any point. Towns are the only place you'll be able to relax. There isn't any danger in town, but there is plenty to see. In every town there's a save room where you can save your progress in the very frequent event of a game over. There's a bathhouse where you can restore any lost health, and every town also has an item shop where you can spend your hard-earned gems. You can buy health potions, weapons, all sorts of stuff. My favourite item has to be the pike ball. Really helps to make short work of those tougher enemies. There are also warp squids, which I'll go into later. These are consistent in every town. There will be some things exclusive to certain towns though. There'll be an area where you can find the ally that will help you access the next labyrinth, and there will occasionally be a minigame area, one of which is required to progress the game. That Roddy Tops race was way harder than it needed to be. In addition, NPCs will be roaming around to give you some tips. I only ever spoke to them accidentally though. While not the most exciting in terms of gameplay, the towns offer some refuge from the harsh and violent world beyond their walls. It's the closest I've come to understanding why I don't go outside. The labyrinths are my favourite part of the game. They're exactly what they sound like. Labyrinths are essentially dungeons. They're maze-like, involve solving puzzles to find keys and unlock doors, and they also include some tricky platforming challenges. That's the sort of thing I like. I'm very used to feeling lost and confused all the time, so the labyrinths make me feel at home. Each of the 4 labyrinths has its own gimmick, and also each one grants Shantae the ability to transform into an animal. One thing that makes Shantae unique as a playable protagonist is her dancing abilities. At some point in each labyrinth, Shantae will rescue a trapped guardian genie, and will be granted the ability to transform into an animal that will help her traverse the labyrinth. By completing the right dance, Shantae can transform into a monkey, which can scale walls, an elephant which can destroy roadblocks, a spider which can climb background elements, and a harpy which can fly. These transformations add so much to the gameplay. They make the platforming more dynamic, intricate, and interesting, and they encourage exploration outside of labyrinths that can lead to finding things like heart holders to increase your maximum health. These transformations keep the gameplay fresh the more you progress. The labyrinths take these transformations into account, and combined with the puzzle-like nature of their structure and the quality of the platforming, they make the labyrinths the best part of the game for me. At the end of each labyrinth, Shantae will need to fight a boss to earn the relevant elemental relic. The bosses can be pretty tricky, they're very intense, and it can sometimes be hard to figure out what it is you're meant to do. I wouldn't call them outright bad, but they're certainly one of the weaker parts of the game. Even so, they don't make the labyrinths any less enjoyable for me. By the sounds of all that, you'd think that Shantae's gameplay is all sunshine and rainbows. And it is. Mostly. Shantae is an absolute joy to play, but it isn't without issues. The big one is the amount of backtracking you have to do. Because the world of Shantae is all interconnected, you need to backtrack through areas you've already been to in order to reach new areas. I understand that with new transformations come new opportunities for exploration in areas you've already visited. You can find things like heart holders and fireflies that you couldn't reach before. You can even find talismans to upgrade your transformations by giving them an attack, There's so much to explore, so much to discover. I only ended up finding 2 heart holders, 1 talisman and 2 fireflies. Based on that, I can tell that I've barely even scratched the surface of this game. There's so much I haven't seen yet. The game encourages revisiting areas to see what you can find. There's nothing inherently wrong with any of that. But because of the way Sequinland is laid out, there's a lot of back and forth you have to deal with, which results in long treks through areas you've been through multiple times before. It gets to a point where you end up rushing through and taking damage just so you can get to your destination before you get annoyed with having to replay the same areas again and again. Remember, going to find secrets is entirely optional, but even if you choose to ignore the secrets, you'll be forced to revisit areas anyway. Now there is a way to circumvent this. Remember those warp squids I mentioned? Each town has a warp squid which allows Shantae to perform a dance to essentially fast travel to each town. But to learn these dances, Shantae must first return 4 baby squids to each warp squid. Baby squids can be found hidden in labyrinths, but most of the time you won't have the transformations available to collect them all on your first visit. If you want to find all the baby squids and learn all the fast travel dances, you need to scamper across Sequinland and return to each labyrinth with all transformations unlocked, explore the labyrinths you've already beaten to find the baby squids, and then go back to towns you've already visited to return them and learn each warp squid's dance. Just so we're absolutely clear on what's happening here, in order to avoid having to do ridiculous amounts of backtracking, you need to do ridiculous amounts of backtracking. That's fucking stupid. You may as well forget going for baby squids entirely. You'll end up doing the same amount of backtracking either way. It should have been that when you visit a town and speak to a warp squid, that warp squid becomes activated and immediately allows you to travel between it and other warp squids you've already spoken to, just like how the Fly HM works in Pokemon. Baby squids shouldn't have ever been part of it. Why are they even in labyrinths to begin with? What kind of parent takes their 4 children into a maze full of death traps? Someone called the Child Protection Services. The backtracking is pretty excessive, and I imagine it would be made a lot worse when you have no idea where you're going. This was not my first playthrough of this game, so I knew where to go and what to do. If this was my first playthrough, I would have struggled a lot more with where to go because I realised that this game struggles a bit with clarity and direction. Even though I have played and beaten this game before, I did end up stumped on a few occasions. Firstly, with the spider transformation, it's not at all clear which surfaces you're able to climb on. The spider webs make sense, but being able to climb up this wall that looks like it's in the background? There's absolutely no indication that that's possible. They could have done a better job at explaining that. And then there's direction. Most of the time the game is good with this. You're always told exactly where to go and how to get there, with one exception. After beating the final labyrinth and having all 4 relics swiped by Risky Boots, who is wearing a disguise that, frankly, a blind person could see through, Mimic tells Shantae to locate Risky's hideout by flying to the highest point. That's it. The highest point. That's all you get. Highest point of where exactly? Great question. Who fucking knows? I guess the game expects you to scour the ceiling of every single location in the game until you find what it is you're looking for, which is really dumb. The highest point is in the desert for some reason. I'm not exactly sure how you're supposed to figure that out. Surely they could have just hinted at its location. Give Shantae a break and just tell her where it is, please. She's done all the work so far, so why don't you lend her a hand, you cunts? Bit much? Anyway, the game ends with the final confrontation in Risky's hideout. Honestly, it's a great finale. A gauntlet of solid platforming challenge presented just as brilliantly as the opening, followed by the trickiest boss in the game, Risky Boots herself, who puts up a good fight. It was an incredible ride. I felt the same way I first played this game, and now having played it a second time, I can confirm those feelings were correct. Shantae is amazing. This is a brilliant game. There's so much to enjoy about it. It has so much personality. Shantae, Risky Boots, and the secondary characters are all enjoyable and contribute to the game in some way, definitely more than the secondary characters of other platformers. The story, as simple as it is more than enough for a game like this. The way the game is presented is fantastic, its visuals are bright, colourful, and pleasing to behold, and its music is upbeat, catchy, and memorable. Not only are the visuals and music brilliant in their own right, but together with the giant interconnected world and day-night cycle, make the Shantae experience an incredibly fun adventure, and an especially impressive one considering that this is a Game Boy Color game. And most importantly, the gameplay is marvellous. It manages to be very simple and also very complex at the same time. Shantae's basic gameplay is engaging and fun on its own, and the transformations and items make it all the more dynamic and interesting, and it offers a decent challenge. It's such an enjoyable experience. Beyond the excessive backtracking, Shantae is a game that is very hard to fault. It's an amazing game, especially for the first game in a series. I think it's criminally underrated, as is every Shantae game to come after it, but I'll save my thoughts on those for another day. If you ever get the chance, please do give Shantae a proper go. I promise you that you won't regret it. And if you do regret it, well, you've got shit taste.